This is the story of Shanda Sharer. Shanda Sharer was born at Pineville Community Hospital in Pineville, Kentucky, on June 6, 1979, to Stephen Sharer and Jacqueline Vaught. Sharer attended 5th and 6th grades in Louisville at St. Paul School, where she was on the cheerleading, volleyball, and softball teams. After Sharer's parents divorced, her mother remarried, and the family moved to Louisville. When her mother divorced again, the family moved to New Albany, Indiana, in June 1991, and Sharer enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School. Early in the school year, she transferred to Our Lady of Perpetual Help School, a Catholic school in New Albany, where she joined the female basketball team. In 1990, 14-year-old Melinda Lovelace began dating another young girl named Amanda Havren. After Lovelace's father left the family and her mother remarried, Lovelace behaved erratically. She got into fights at school and felt depressed. She received professional counseling. In March 1991, Lovelace disclosed her lesbian orientation to her mother, who was initially furious, but eventually accepted it. As the years progressed, though, Lovelace's relationship with Havren deteriorated. Havren and Shanda Sharer had met early during the fall semester when they got into a fight. However, they became friends while in detention for the altercation. Lovelace immediately grew jealous of Havren and Sharer's relationship. In early October, Havren and Sharer attended a school dance, where Lovelace found and confronted them. Although Havren and Lovelace had never formally ended their relationship, Lovelace started to date an older girl. After Havren and Sharer attended a festival together in late October, Lovelace began to discuss killing Sharer and threatened Sharer in public. Concerned about the effects of their daughter's relationship with Havren, Sharer's parents arranged for her to transfer to a Catholic school in late November, and the girls started drifting apart by December. Melinda Lovelace was born in New Albany, Indiana, on October 28, 1975, the youngest of 3 daughters. To Marjorie and Larry Lovelace. Larry was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, and he was treated as a hero upon his return. His wife later described him as a pervert who would wear her and her daughter's underwear and makeup, and was incapable of staying monogamous and had a mixture of jealousy and fascination with seeing her have sex with other men and women. They lived in or near Albany, Indiana, throughout Melinda's childhood. Larry worked irregularly for the Southern Railroad after his military service. His profession allowed him to work whenever most convenient for him. In 1972, Larry became a probationary officer with the New Albany Police Department, but he was fired after 8 months when he and his partner assaulted a black man whom Larry accused of sleeping with his wife. In 1988, Larry briefly worked as a mail carrier, but quit after 3 months and very little work, having brought most of his mail home to destroy it. Marjorie worked intermittently since 1974. When both parents were working, the family was financially well, living in an upper middle class suburb of Floyd's Knobs, Indiana. Larry did not usually share his income with the family, making the mortgage payments and impulsively spending the money he earned on himself, especially firearms, motorcycles, and cars. He filed for bankruptcy in 1980, and extended family members often described the Lovelace daughters as visiting their houses hungry, apparently not getting food at home. Through most of their relationship, Larry was unfaithful to his wife, and they often had an open marriage. They would visit bars in Louisville, where Lovelace would pretend to be a doctor or a dentist and introduce Marjorie as his girlfriend. When Melinda was 9 years old, Larry forced Margie to participate in a gangbang, after which she tried to drown herself. After that incident, she refused him sex for a month, until he violently raped her as their daughters watched. In summer of 1986, after she would not let him go home with 2 women he met at a bar, Larry beat Marjorie so severely that she was hospitalized. He was convicted of battery. The extent of Larry's abuse of his daughters and other children is unclear. Various court testimonies claimed he fondled Michelle as an infant, molested Marjorie's 13-year-old sister during early in the marriage, molested the girl's cousin Teddy from age 10 to 14, and both older girls said he molested them, though Melinda didn't admit that this ever happened to her. She slept in a bed with him until he abandoned his family when she was 14. In court, Teddy described an incident in which Larry tied all three sisters in a garage and raped them in succession. However, the sisters did not confirm this account. Larry was verbally abusive to his daughters and fired a handgun in Michelle's direction when she was 7, intentionally missing her. She would also embarrass his children by finding their underwear and smelling it in front of other family members. For 2 years, beginning when Melinda was 5, the family was deeply involved in Graceland Baptist Church. Larry and Marjorie gave full confession and renounced drinking and swinging while they were members. Larry became a Baptist lay preacher, and Marjorie became the school nurse. The church later arranged for Melinda to be taken to a motel room with a 50-year-old man for a 5-hour exorcism. Larry became a marriage counselor with the church and acquired a reputation for being too forward with women, eventually attempting to rape one of them. After that incident, the Loveless parents left the church and returned to their former professions, drinking and open marriage. In November 1990, Larry was caught spying on Melinda and a friend, and Marjorie attacked him with a knife, sending him to the hospital after he attempted to grab it. She then attempted suicide again, and her daughters called the authorities. After this incident, Larry filed for divorce and moved to Avon Park, Florida. Melinda felt crushed, especially as Larry remarried. He sent letters to her for a while, playing on her emotions, but eventually severed all contact with her. Lori Tackett, full name Mary Lorraine Tackett, was born in Madison, Indiana, on October 5, 1974. Her parents were fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, and her father was a factory worker with 2 felony convictions in the 1960s. Tackett claimed that she was molested at least twice as a child at ages 5 and 12. In May 1989, her mother discovered that Tackett was changing into jeans at school and, after a confrontation that night, attempted to strangle her. Social workers became involved, and Tackett's parents agreed to unannounced visits to ensure that child abuse was not occurring. Tackett and her mother came into periodic conflict. At one point, her mother went to Hope Rippey's house after learning that Rippey's father had purchased a Ouija board for the girls. She demanded that the board be burnt and that Rippey house be exorcised. Tackett became increasingly rebellious after her 15th birthday. She also became fascinated with the occult. She would often attempt to impress her friends by pretending to be possessed by the spirit of Deanna the Vampire. She began to engage in self-harm, especially after early 1991 when she began dating a girl who was involved in the practice. Her parents discovered the self-mutilation and checked her into a hospital on March 19, 1991. She was prescribed an antidepressant and released. 2 days later, with her girlfriend and Tony Lawrence, she cut her wrist deeply and was returned to the hospital. After treatment of her wound, she was admitted to the hospital psychiatric ward. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and confessed that she had experienced hallucinations while she was a young child. She was discharged on April 12th. She dropped out of high school in September 1991. Tackett stayed in the Louisville area in October 1991 to live with various friends. She met Melinda Loveless, but the two did not become friends until late November. In December, Tackett moved back to Madison on the promise that her father would buy her a car. She still spent most of her time in Louisville and New Albany, and, by December, most of it with Melinda Loveless. Hope Anna Rippey was born in Madison, Indiana, in June 1976. Her father was an engineer at a power plant. Her parents divorced in February 1984, and she moved to Quincy, Michigan with her mother and siblings for 3 years. She claimed that living with her family in Michigan was somewhat turbulent. Her parents resumed their relationship in Madison in 1987. She was reunited with her friends Lori Tackett and Tony Lawrence, whom she had known since childhood, although her parents saw Tackett as a bad influence. As with the other girls, Rippey began to self-harm at age 15. Tony Lawrence was born in Madison, Indiana in February 1976. Her father was a boilermaker. She was close friends with Hope Rippey from childhood onward. She was abused by a relative at age 9 and raped by a teenage boy at age 14, although the police were only able to order an issue to keep the boy away from Lawrence. She went into counseling after the incident but did not follow through. She became promiscuous, began to self-harm, and attempted suicide in 8th grade. On the night of January 10th, 1992, Tony Lawrence, age 15, Hope Rippey, age 15, and Lori Tackett, age 17, drove in Tackett's car from Madison, Indiana, to Melinda Lovelace's house in New Albany. Lawrence, while friends of Tackett, had not previously met Lovelace, age 16, though Rippey had met her once before and had gotten along with her. However, upon arrival, they borrowed some clothes from Lovelace, and she showed them a knife, telling them she was going to scare Shanda Sharer with it. Only Lovelace had ever met Sharer, although Tackett already knew of the plan to intimidate the 12-year-old girl. Lovelace explained to the two girls that she disliked Sharer for being a copycat and for stealing her girlfriend. Tackett let Ripley drive for the four girls to Jefferson, Indiana, where Sharer lived, stopping at McDonald's restaurant en route to ask for directions. They arrived at Sharer's house shortly before dark. Lovelace instructed Rippey and Lawrence to go to the door and introduce themselves as friends of Heavren, Lovelace's former and Sharer's current girlfriend. They should invite Sharer to come with them to see Heavren, who was waiting for them at the Witch's Castle, a ruined stone house, also known as Mistletoe Falls, located on an isolated hill overlooking the Ohio River. Sharer said that she could not go because her parents were awake, and she told the girls to come back around midnight. Lovelace was angry at first, but Rippey and Lawrence assured her about returning for Sharer later. The four girls crossed the river to Louisville, Kentucky. She attended a punk rock concert at the Abdon Skate Park near Interstate 65. Lawrence and Rippey quickly lost interest in the music and went to the parking lot outside the skate park, where they engaged in sexual activities with two boys in Tackett's car. Eventually, the four girls left for Sharer's house. During the ride, Lovelace said she could not wait to kill Sharer. However, Lovelace also said that she found Sharer attractive and would like to have sex with her, and that she just intended to use the knife to frighten her. When they arrived at Sharer's house at 12:30 a.m., Lawrence refused to retrieve Sharer, so Tackett and Ripley went to the door. Lovelace hid under a blanket in the back seat of the car with a dull knife. Sharer was waiting for the girls. Rippey told her that Heavren was still at the witch's castle. Sharer was reluctant to go with them, yet agreed after changing her clothes. As they got in the car, Rippey began questioning Sharer about her relationship with Heavren just to trigger off Lovelace. Lovelace, having heard enough, sprang out from the back seat and put the knife to Sharer's throat and began interrogating her about her sexual relationship with Heavren. They drove towards Utica, Indiana, and the occasional hangout for local teenagers, Witch's Castle. Tackett told the girls the legend said the house was once owned by 9 witches and townspeople burned the house to get rid of the witches. At Witch's Castle, they took a sobbing Sharer in and bound her arms and legs with rope. There, Lovelace taunted that she has pretty hair and wondered how pretty she would look if they were to cut it off, which frightened Sharer even more. Lovelace began taking off Sharer's rings and handed each to the girls. At some point, Rippey had taken Sharer's Mickey Mouse watch and danced to the Disney tune it played. Tackett, sick of the childish games, started describing the dungeon to Sharer, that it was filled with human remains and bones, and hers would be next. Subsequently, Tackett went back to the car where Lawrence followed her to retrieve her cherished smiley face sweater. She returned and lit it on fire, but immediately feared that the fire would be spotted by bypassing cars. So they left. During the car ride, Sharer continued begging them to take her back home. Tackett turned on the boombox sitting on her lap and played opera and mimicked Sharer, acting like she was crying, and laughed what she called her devil laugh. Lovelace ordered Sharer to slip off her bra, which she then handed to Rippy, who slid off her own bra and replaced it with Sharer's, all while steering the car. They got so lost, they stopped for some directions at a gas station, where they covered Sharer in a blanket. While Tackett went inside to ask for directions, Lawrence called a boy she knew in Louisville, and chatted for several minutes to ease her worries, failing to mention Sharer's abduction. They returned to the car, but got lost again and pulled up to another gas station. There, Lawrence and Rippy had spotted a couple of boys and talked to them before once again getting back into the car and leaving. They arrived at the edge of some woods near Tackett's home in Madison, Indiana. Tackett led them to a garbage dump off a logging road in a densely forested area. Lawrence and Rippy were frightened and stayed in the car. Lovelace and Tackett made Sharer strip naked. Then, Lovelace beat Sharer with her fists. Next, Lovelace repeatedly slammed Sharer's face into her knee, which cut Sharer's mouth on her own braces. Lovelace tried to slash Sharer's throat, but the knife was too dull. Rippy came out of the car to hold down Sharer. Lovelace and Tackett took turns stabbing Sharer in the chest. They then strangled Sharer with a rope until she was unconscious, placed her in the trunk of the car, and told the other two girls that Sharer was dead. The girls drove to Tackett's nearby home and went inside to drink soda and clean themselves. When they realized Sharer was screaming in the trunk, Tackett went out with a paring knife and stabbed her several more times, coming back a few minutes later covered in blood. After she washed, Tackett told the girls his future with her runestones. At 2:30 a.m., Lawrence and Rippy stayed behind as Tackett and Lovelace went country cruising, down to the nearby town of Canaan. Sharer continued to make crying and gurgling noises, so Tackett stopped the car. When they opened the trunk, Sharer sat up, covered in blood, with her eyes rolled back in her head, but unable to speak. Tackett beat her with a tire iron until she was silent. Lovelace and Tackett returned to Tackett's house just before daybreak to clean up again. Rippy asked about Sharer, and Tackett laughingly described the torture. The conversation woke up Tackett's mother, who yelled at her daughter for being out late and bringing home the girls, so Tackett agreed to take them home. She drove to the burn pile, where they opened up the trunk to stare at Sharer. Lawrence refused. Rippy sprayed Sharer with Windex and taunted, "You're not so hot now, are you? Now let's take her pants off and get to it, ladies." The girls drove to a gas station near Madison Consolidated High School, pumped some gasoline into the car, and bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Tackett poured out the Pepsi and refilled the bottle with gasoline. They drove north of Madison, past Jefferson Proving Ground, to Lemon Road off U.S. Route 421, a place known to Rippy. Lawrence remained in the car while Tackett and Rippy wrapped Sharer, who was still alive, in a blanket and carried her to a field by the gravel country road. Tackett made Rippy pour the gasoline on Sharer, and then they set her on fire. Lovelace was not convinced Sharer was dead, so they returned a few minutes later to pour the rest of the gasoline on her. The girls went to McDonald's at 9:30 a.m. for breakfast. They laughed about Sharer's looking like one of the sausages they were eating. Lawrence, horrified, phoned a friend and told her about the murder. Tackett then dropped off Lawrence and Rippy at their homes and finally returned to her own home with Lovelace. She told Heverin that they had killed Sharer and arranged to pick up Heverin later that day. A friend of Lovelace's, Crystal Wathen, came over to Lovelace's house, and they told her what had happened. Then, the three girls drove to pick up Heverin and bring her back to Lovelace's house, where they told Heverin the story, although she did not believe it was true. Heverin comforted the hysterical Lovelace. Both Heverin and Wathen became convinced when Tackett showed them the trunk of the car, with Sharer's bloody handprints and socks still there. Heverin was horrified and asked to be taken home. When they pulled up in front of her house, Lovelace kissed Heverin and told her she loved her, and pleaded her not to tell anyone. Heverin promised she wouldn't before entering her house. Later on the morning of January 11th, 1992, two brothers from Canaan, Indiana, were driving towards Jefferson Proving Ground to go hunting when they noticed a body on the side of the road. They called the police at 10:55 a.m. and were asked to return to the corpse. David Cam, who was later acquitted of his own family's murders, was one of the responding officers. Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and detectives began an investigation, collecting forensic evidence at the scene. They initially suspected a drug deal gone wrong and could not believe the crime had been committed by locals. Steve Sharer noticed his daughter missing early on January 11. After phoning neighbors and friends all morning, he called his ex-wife, Shanda's mother, at 1:45 p.m. They met and filed a missing person report with the Clark County Sheriff. At 8:20 p.m., a hysterical Toni Lawrence went to the Jefferson County Sheriff's office with her parents. She gave a rambling statement identifying the victim as Shanda, naming the three other girls involved as best she could, and describing the main events of the previous night. Shipley contacted the Clark County Sheriff and was finally able to match the body to Shanda Sharer's missing person report. Detectives obtained dental records that positively identified Shanda Sharer as the victim. Lovelace and Tackett were arrested on January 12th. The bulk of the evidence for the arrest warrant was Lawrence's statement. The prosecution immediately declared its intention to try both suspects as adults. For several months, the prosecutors and defense attorneys did not release any information about the case, giving the news media only the statement by Lawrence. All four girls were charged as adults. To avoid the death penalty, the girls accepted plea bargains. Mitigating factors. All four girls had troubled backgrounds with claims of physical or sexual abuse committed by a parent or other adult. Hope Rippey, Toni Lawrence, and Lori Tackett had a history of self-harming behavior. Tackett was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and suffers from hallucinations. Melinda Lovelace, often described as the ringleader of the attack, had the most extensive history of abuse and mental health issues. Tackett and Lovelace were sentenced for 60 years in the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis. With maximum time reduced for good behavior, they could be released in 2020. Rippey was sentenced to 60 years, with 10 years suspended for mitigating circumstance, plus 10 years of medium supervision probation. Appeals. In October 2007, Lovelace's attorney, Mark Small, requested a hearing to argue for his client's release. He said that Lovelace had been profoundly retarded by childhood abuse. Moreover, she had not been represented competently by counsel during her sentencing, which caused her to accept a plea bargain in the face of exaggerated claims about her chances of receiving the death penalty. Small also argued that Lovelace, who was 16 years old when she signed the plea agreement, was too young to enter into a contract in the state of Indiana without consenting from a parent or guardian, which had not been obtained. If the judge accepted these arguments, Lovelace could have been retried or released outright. On January 8, 2008, Lovelace's request was rejected by Jefferson Circuit Judge Ted Todd. Instead, Lovelace will be eligible for parole in 15 years, thus maintaining the original guilty plea. On November 14, 2008, Lovelace's appeal was denied by Indiana Court of Appeals, upholding Judge Todd's ruling. Small stated that he would seek to have jurisdiction over the case moved to the Supreme Court of Indiana. Both Lovelace and Tackett are currently serving their original sentences. Given Indiana's policy of reducing sentences by a day for every day served with good behavior, both women could possibly walk out of prison in 2020, when Lovelace is 46 and Tackett is 47 years old. Toni Lawrence was released on December 14, 2000, after serving 9 years. She remained on parole until December 2002. On April 28, 2006, Hope Rippey was released from Indiana's women's prison on parole after serving 14 years of her original sentence. She remained on supervised parole for 5 years. And thus is the end of our story, the murder of Shanda Sharer.